Laughter echoed through the grand arena, a cruel, piercing sound that brought tears to Genevieve's eyes. They pointed at the trembling, scruffy hound pressed against her leg, calling it a pathetic stray. They didn't know the beast hiding beneath that matted fur was about to bring the entire kingdom to its knees. Modern werewolf society was not just about howling at the moon. It was about offshore accounts, real estate portfolios, and maintaining a flawless public image. Genevieve Sterling understood this better than anyone. As the acting alpha of the Silver Pine Pack, she spent more time fighting zoning laws and corporate buyouts than she did patrolling the borders of her territory in the Bitterroot Valley of Montana. Her pack was dying. Once a proud lineage that controlled thousands of acres of pristine timberland, Silver Pine had been decimated by a combination of poor investments by her late father and predatory maneuvers by rival packs. To the human world, Genevieve was simply a struggling 24-year-old heiress trying to save her family's failing lumber business. To the hidden world of wolves, she was weak, vulnerable, and dangerously close to losing her pack's recognized status. Her personal life was equally shattered. Only a year prior, at the lavish winter solstice gala held at the Street Regis in Aspen, she had expected to receive a mating bite from Garrett Hayes. Garrett was the alpha of the Ironclad Pack, a ruthless, newly wealthy faction that had made billions in tech and private security. Instead of a proposal, Garrett had publicly humiliated Genevieve, breaking their long-standing arrangement to announce his mating to Savannah Sterling, a distant, wealthier cousin of Genevieve's who had the capital to fund Garrett's political ambitions. The rejection had nearly destroyed Genevieve's wolf, leaving her spiritually fractured and socially exiled. Then came the night she found the stray. It was late October, freezing rain turning the gravel roads off Interstate 90 into treacherous mud slicks. Genevieve had been driving her battered Ford Bronco back from a humiliating meeting with a human bank manager in Missoula when she saw the lump on the shoulder of the highway. At first, she thought it was a deer. But as she pulled over, the headlights illuminated a massive, broken canine. It was undeniably a wolf, but not like any shifter she had ever seen. Its coat was a patchy, matted mess of ash gray and charcoal. It was emaciated, its ribs protruding sharply against its flanks, and a horrific, jagged burn marked the unmistakable, blackened scarring left by weaponized silver ran down its spine. One of its back legs was mangled, the Achilles tendon seemingly severed. When Genevieve approached, the beast didn't growl. It merely lifted a massive, blocky head, fixing her with one pale, milky, unseeing eye. The other eye was swollen shut. "Hey there," she had whispered, kneeling in the freezing mud, ignoring the ruin of her only professional suit. "Who did this to you?" She didn't feel a shifter's aura. Usually a werewolf radiates a specific frequency of power, a hum of predatory energy. This creature felt completely void, like a black hole. Assuming it was a wild wolf or perhaps a shifter whose wolf spirit had been entirely broken, a tragic condition known as being hollowed, she carefully loaded the massive animal into the back of her Bronco. She named him Ash. For 6 months, Genevieve poured what little money and energy she had left into keeping Ash alive. She couldn't take him to a pack healer, she couldn't afford their extortionate rates, and showing weakness was an invitation for a challenge. Instead, she relied on Dr. Eris Kensington, a discreet, exorbitant private veterinarian in Seattle who catered to exotic animals and the occasional careless shifter. Under Genevieve's care in her isolated cabin, Ash survived. He remained trapped in his wolf form, a clear sign of deep trauma, and he walked with a severe, dragging limp. His coat never quite regained a healthy luster, remaining a wiry, scruffy gray. He looked like a giant, battered wolfhound mix, but he was fiercely loyal. He slept at the foot of her bed, his large head resting on her ankles, and followed her everywhere, his milky eye tracking her movements with unnerving precision. In the quiet solitude of the cabin, Genevieve would talk to him. She told him about the crushing weight of the pack's debt. She cried into his scruff over Garrett's betrayal. Ash would simply listen, emitting a low, rumbling vibration in his chest that managed to soothe her frayed nerves. The fragile peace of their isolation was shattered in early spring when a heavy black envelope arrived via private courier. It bore the gold-embossed seal of King Maximilian, the Alpha King of the North American territories. It was a formal summons to the decennial tournament of Fangs, held at the king's sprawling, heavily fortified private estate deep in the Wyoming wilderness. The tournament was a brutal display of wealth, power, and physical dominance. Alphas and elite warriors from across the continent gathered to compete. The prize for the victor was immense: a guaranteed seat on the High Council, exclusive trade contracts, and, most importantly to Genevieve, a royal land grant. A royal grant would wipe out her pack's debts, protect their land from human taxes, and secure her borders against Garrett's encroachment. She had to enter. Not to win the combat trials, she was a capable fighter. But she was no match for the hulking, steroid-fueled alphas of the southern packs, but to participate in the endurance and strategy trials, hoping to earn enough favor from the king to beg for a smaller, secondary grant. When she packed her duffel bag, Ash stood blocking the cabin door. He let out a sharp, ragged bark, refusing to budge. "I can't take you, Ash," she sighed, rubbing her temples. "It's a gathering of apex predators. They'll tear you apart if you look at them wrong. It's too dangerous." The scruffy wolf took a step forward, leaning his heavy, scarred body against her legs, letting out a low, persistent whine. He bumped his wet nose against her hand, his one good eye fixing her with an intensity that made the breath catch in her throat. There was an eerie, ancient intelligence in that stare. Against her better judgment, she bought him a heavy-duty leather collar and let him jump into the passenger seat. King Maximilian's estate was a fortress disguised as a luxury retreat. Nestled in a valley surrounded by snow-capped peaks, the grounds were a dizzying mix of feral wilderness and obscene human wealth. Dozens of custom matte black G-Wagons, armored Range Rovers, and low-slung sports cars lined the meticulously paved driveways. The air was thick with the scent of pine, expensive Tom Ford cologne, and the heavy, metallic tang of raw testosterone and aggression. Genevieve pulled her dusty Bronco into a parking spot far away from the main entrance of the Grand Lodge, feeling the familiar knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. As she stepped out, clipping a heavy leather leash to Ash's collar, she immediately felt the weight of a dozen stares. Alphas in tailored Armani suits and tactical gear paused their conversations to look at her. The murmurs began almost instantly. She kept her chin high, adjusting the collar of her simple black combat jacket, and walked toward the registration pavilion, a massive canvas structure erected on the sweeping front lawn. Ash hobbled beside her, his bad leg dragging slightly in the manicured grass, his scruffy fur standing out terribly against the sleek, polished coats of the purebred guard dogs and pristine familiars that some alphas kept for show. Well, if it isn't the last gasp of the Silver Pine Pack. Genevieve froze. The voice was a smooth, arrogant drawl that still featured in her worst nightmares. She turned slowly to see Garrett stepping out from the registration tent. He looked bulkier than the year before, his broad shoulders straining the seams of a custom charcoal suit. Clinging to his arm was Savannah, draped in a white cashmere coat that practically glowed in the afternoon sun. "Garrett," Genevieve said evenly, keeping her voice carefully devoid of emotion. Savannah let out a high, tinkling laugh, her perfectly manicured hand coming up to cover her mouth. Her eyes darted from Genevieve's practical boots down to the scarred, limping creature at her side. "Oh, Genevieve, we heard you were struggling, but I didn't realize things had gotten this desperate. Are you scavenging your companions from the city pound now?" A few of Garrett's enforcers, standing a few paces behind them, chuckled darkly. "He's a rescue," Genevieve said tightly, her grip on the leather leash tightening. Ash leaned heavily against her thigh, a solid, grounding presence. He didn't growl. He merely stared at Garrett with his one milky eye, his head lowered in what looked like submission but felt oddly calm. "That's your pet?" Garrett sneered, stepping closer. He invaded her personal space, projecting his alpha aura, a suffocating, heavy pressure meant to force weaker wolves to their knees. Genevieve gritted her teeth, locking her knees to keep from trembling under the psychic weight. "It's a walking corpse, General Careful. It might give the king's prized hounds fleas." "Leave us alone, Garrett," she said, her voice dropping an octave. Garrett leaned in, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper meant only for her ears. "You shouldn't have come. The land is already mine. I've been buying up the human debt surrounding your borders. By the end of this tournament, Silver Pine will be a footnote in the history books, and you'll be begging to scrub the floors of my estate." He pulled back, a charming, fake smile plastered on his face for the benefit of the surrounding onlookers. He lazily kicked out a polished dress shoe, catching Ash in his bad, scarred leg. It wasn't a hard kick, but the cruelty of it made Genevieve see red. She lunged forward, but Ash moved faster. The crippled wolf didn't snap or bite. He simply shifted his weight, allowing Garrett's foot to glance off his shoulder, and let out a sound. It wasn't a growl. It was a low, resonant vibration that seemed to start deep within the earth, rattling the pebbles on the walkway. Garrett stumbled back a step, looking momentarily disoriented, before sneering again. "Keep the mud on a tight leash, sweetheart. If it steps into the arena during the trials, I won't hold back." The first official event of the tournament was the Proving Grounds. It was a massive, chaotic free-for-all held in a designated 5-acre enclosure of dense forest behind the estate. The goal was simple: survival and submission. Participants had to secure flags hidden throughout the woods while fending off attacks from other packs. The last 20 standing would advance to the royal trials. Companions and familiars were permitted, but highly discouraged unless they were lethal. As twilight descended, the stadium lights mounted high in the ancient pine trees flickered to life, casting long, eerie shadows across the forest floor. Genevieve stood at the edge of the tree line, checking the straps of her tactical vest. Ash sat beside her, perfectly still. The horn sounded a deep, brassy blast that echoed off the mountains. Instantly, the woods erupted into chaos. The sounds of shifting bones, tearing fabric, and guttural snarls filled the air as dozens of participants abandoned their human forms. Genevieve chose to remain on 2 legs. Shifting consumed too much energy, and she needed her human agility to navigate the dense brush and locate a flag. She sprinted into the tree line, Ash keeping pace with surprising stamina despite his limp. For the first 30 minutes, her strategy worked. She used her deep knowledge of forest terrain to evade the brutal skirmishes happening in the clearings, sticking to the shadows, masking her scent with pine sap and wet earth. She managed to secure a bright red flag from a hollowed-out log and tucked it into her vest. "Just survive the next hour," she told herself, heart hammering against her ribs. "Just stay hidden." But the forest went unnaturally quiet. The crickets stopped chirping, found her. Genevieve spun around. Stepping out from the shadows of a massive oak tree were 3 massive, shifting wolves. Their coats were jet black, the signature of the ironclad pack. In the center, standing on 2 legs and casually rolling up the sleeves of his blood-spattered shirt, was Garrett. He hadn't bothered to shift yet. He preferred the psychological terror of hunting wolves in his human skin. "You're remarkably slippery, Jen," Garrett said, a cruel smile playing on his lips. His 3 enforcers flanked him, their golden eyes locked onto her. "But this is the end of the line. Hand over the flag, submit your pack's claim, and I'll let you walk out of here with minor broken bones." "Go to hell!" Genevieve spat, backing up slowly. She bumped against the rough bark of a pine tree. She was cornered. Garrett sighed in mock disappointment. "Have it your way. Boys, break her legs, and kill that pathetic stray. Its smell is offending me." The 3 massive black wolves lunged simultaneously. Genevieve braced for the impact, throwing her arms up. But the impact never came. A shadow moved in front of her. Ash, the crippled, scruffy, half-blind hound, stepped directly into the path of the 3 charging alphas. One of the ironclad wolves snapped its jaws, aiming to crush the stray's neck. Ash didn't dodge. Instead, the air around them suddenly plummeted in temperature. The stadium lights overhead flickered violently, buzzing with a surge of electrical interference. A sound echoed through the clearing, not the wet tear of flesh, but the deafening, explosive crack of thick bones rearranging at blinding speed. The scent of ozone and ancient, suffocating power flooded the space, forcing the 3 attacking wolves to skid to a halt, their tails tucking between their legs in sudden, instinctual terror. Genevieve fell to her knees, gasping for air as the psychic weight of a true, monstrous alpha aura slammed into the clearing. It made Garrett's previous display feel like a gentle breeze. Before them, the scruffy gray coat was tearing away, expanding. The crippled back legs snapped into perfect, terrifying alignment. The creature rising from the forest floor was no longer a dog. It was an absolute nightmare of muscle, black fur, and silver scars. It stood nearly 8 feet tall on its hind legs, dwarfing the ironclad wolves. The beast turned its massive head, its one good eye no longer milky, but glowing with a radiant molten gold fire. Garrett's face drained of all color. He took a stumbling step backward, his voice cracking in sheer, unadulterated panic. "Impossible," Garrett whispered, falling to his knees as the pressure forced him down. You were dead." The Proving Grounds enclosure, once a chaotic theater of combat, was now a tomb of silence. The ambient hum of the stadium lights was drowned out by the heavy, humid silence of pure terror. It was a silence that started in the clearing where Garrett Hayes knelt, but it was spreading outwardly, rippling through the dense forest and back toward the king's viewing pavilion. Every shifter within a 5-mile radius felt it an eruption of power so massive, so ancient, and so terrifying that it bypassed conscious thought and spoke directly to their dynamic hindbrains. It was the energy of a primordial apex predator, a creature that existed before packs, before laws, before kings. Genevieve remained on her knees, the damp earth pressing through her tactical trousers. She was the epicenter of this tectonic shift, yet she felt oddly untouched by the destructive energy radiating outward from the being beside her. She looked up at Ash, the creature she had fed with a medicine dropper, whose matted gray fur she had spent hours combing. He was unrecognizable. Standing nearly 8 feet tall on his hind legs, the nightmare wolf was a pillar of absolute dominance. The wiry, scruffy coat was gone, replaced by dense, charcoal-black fur that seemed to absorb the flickering stadium lights. The severe limp was erased, the powerful muscles of his back and legs rippling with tension. But it was the one good eye, no longer milky but glowing with the radiant, terrifying fire of molten gold, that held everyone frozen. Garrett Hayes was shaking. He tried to speak, but only a wet, pathetic clicking sound emerged from his throat. His powerful alpha aura, which had felt so suffocating moments ago, was entirely extinguished, suppressed by Ash's sheer presence like a candle snuffed out by a hurricane. With a low, resonant growl that vibrated through the ground, Ash took a slow step toward Garrett. The leather leash, still hanging from his massive neck, dragged uselessly in the mud. The 2 ironclad wolves flanking Garrett didn't wait to be attacked. Their instincts overcame their loyalty. They dissolved into their human forms, gasping for air, and scrambled backward through the underbrush, fleeing for their lives. Garrett, however, was paralyzed. He stared into the glowing golden eye and saw his execution. "Please," Garrett finally managed, his voice cracking. He didn't even try to shift. His wolf spirit was already submitting, begging for mercy before a god. "I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know." Elias. Elias. Genevieve felt the name resonate in her own chest. She had heard that name only in hushed, historical conversations. Elias Maximilian was the elder brother of the current Alpha King, a legendary warrior rumored to have been the most powerful Alpha born in centuries. He was supposed to have died 20 years ago in a brutal ambush at Blackwood Creek, an attack attributed to an extinct rogue pack. This battered, one-eyed stray wasn't just an Alpha. He was the Alpha, the rightful heir. Ash Elias didn't offer mercy. He didn't move quickly. He simply closed the distance, the ground trembling slightly with each step. But it used his claws, he used his presence. He lowered his massive, charcoal head until his snout was inches from Garrett's terrified face. He let out another growl, a targeted pulse of psychic energy. Garrett screamed, a raw, inhuman sound, and collapsed forward, pressing his forehead into the mud. He was breaking, not physically, but spiritually. He was offering an absolute irreversible submission. The silence of the woods was shattered by the screech of tires and the rapid thud of heavy boots. The containment crew, an elite squad of the King's Royal Guards, armored in silver-plated tactical gear, burst into the clearing, their tranquilizer rifles drawn. In the center walked Commander Alaric, a battle-hardened warrior whose face usually betrayed no emotion. Alaric stopped dead as he saw the towering creature standing over the broken Alpha of the ironclad pack. His eyes widened, and he slowly lowered his weapon. "Fall back!" Alaric barked to his men, his voice trembling slightly. "Do not engage. I repeat, do not engage." Elias turned his massive head toward the guards. He didn't attack. He simply raised his hackles and let out a single, earth-shaking bark. The sheer sonic force of the sound knocked 2 of the guards off their feet. "Genevieve Sterling!" Alaric yelled, his gaze shifting to where she knelt. "Control your companion." "I can't," she yelled back, her voice raw. But as Elias turned his glowing gaze back to her, the temperature in the clearing began to rise. The terrifying pressure eased. He wasn't submitting, but he was choosing to de-escalate. Slowly, the explosive, terrifying crack of rearranging bone echoed again. The process looked agony. The towering nightmare condensed, the charcoal-black fur shrinking back into the patched, scruffy gray coat. The glowing gold fire faded from his eye, leaving it milky and half-blind. Within minutes, the powerful warrior was gone, replaced once again by the battered, limping stray. Ash Elias let out a soft, tired whine and walked back to Genevieve. He leaned his head against her shoulder, his massive, scarred body trembling with exhaustion. The containment crew, still terrified, moved in to arrest the unresponsive Garrett Hayes. Genevieve Sterling was the last participant left in the woods. The next morning, the Grand Lodge was a beehive of panic and frantic negotiation. The news of what had happened in the proving grounds had spread like wildfire. The scruffy, ridiculous pet of the failing Silver Pine Pack had revealed itself to be a monster of legendary power, a beast that had broken a powerful alpha without laying a claw on him. Genevieve sat in her assigned cabin, her hands wrapped around a cup of cold coffee. Ash lay at her feet, sleeping deeply. A small line of dried blood at the corner of his nose, a sign of the internal toll his rapid transformation had taken. There was a polite knock on the door, and Savannah Sterling entered. She wasn't wearing cashmere today. She was dressed in severe, dark clothing, her usual smug expression replaced by a mask of pale anxiety. "Genevieve," Savannah said, her voice unusually subdued. "Garrett is incapacitated. The healers say his mind is fractured. King Maximilian is furious, and he's making moves to seize the ironclad assets, including the properties surrounding your border." "Why are you telling me this, Savannah?" Genevieve asked, her voice hollow. Savannah twisted a large emerald ring on her finger. "I'm a Sterling, General. I always back the winner. I'm ending my arrangement with Garrett. And the king has summoned you, both of you." She looked down at the sleeping, scruffy wolf with a look of pure terror. "You need to be careful. The king is more frightened than I've ever seen him." Genevieve stood up, adjusting the collar of her jacket. "I'm not afraid of him, Savannah. And neither is he." She nudged Ash with her boot, and he immediately pulled himself upright, his bad leg dragging as he followed her out the door. The king's private audience chamber was a room of intimidating power, overlooking the rugged mountains. King Maximilian sat in a high-backed leather chair, flanked by 4 of his most elite guards. He was a handsome man in his 50s, but today his face was pale, a fine sheen of sweat covering his forehead. Genevieve entered, keeping her head high, Ash hobbling at her side on the leather leash. She stopped in the center of the room. "Your Majesty," she said, offering a stiff nod. Maximilian didn't look at her. His gaze was fixed entirely on the battered wolf. He saw the milky eye, the wiry fur, and the severe limp. But most of all, his eyes locked onto the horrific, blackened scar running down the creature's spine, the mark of silver that he had personally ensured was applied 20 years ago. "Max," Genevieve said. The sound was wrong. It wasn't Genevieve's voice. It was a guttural, terrifying echo that seemed to come from the very walls of the room. Ash didn't shift. Instead, a projection of energy, a shimmering, spectral image of a scarred, gray-haired human warrior with one milky eye, appeared beside the wolf. It was the same mental communication technique used by ancient alphas, a display of power Maximilian had never been able to master. "Max," the spectral voice of Elias Maximilian projected through the room. "You look old." King Maximilian stood up, his hand fumbling for a concealed weapon. His guards stepped forward, but they were trembling. You are a ghost," Maximilian stammered, his eyes wide. "You died at Blackwood Creek." I saw the body." "You saw a body, yes," Elias projected, the shimmering image stepping closer. The air in the room became freezing, a loyal guard who volunteered to take my place. While you and your loyalists were poisoning me with weaponized silver, I was already gone. The private details of the Blackwood Creek ambush, the exact type of silver poisoning used, known only to Maximilian and his innermost circle, were now being broadcast by a mind that had survived it. The private name of the guard who had taken his place, Caleb Foster, was revealed, sealing the truth. "Why did you come back?" Maximilian whispered, collapsing back into his chair. "I came to find someone worthy," Elias projected, the spectral hand passing harmlessly through the real leather collar still around the wolf's neck. "Someone who didn't care about lineage, or wealth, or power. Someone who would save a battered, limping stray, simply because it was the right thing to do." The shimmering image dissolved, and the scruffy gray wolf stepped forward, its one milky eye locked on the king. He let out a single, deafening bark. The immediate shift was palpable. A roar went up from the assembled alphas in the viewing hall outside. They had felt the energy of the projection and heard the king's confession via the sound system Maximilian had carelessly left active. The tournament was over. The legitimacy of the current king was shattered. Within minutes, Commander Alaric marched into the audience chamber, but not to arrest Elias. He stopped before Genevieve Sterling and bowed, presenting his silver-bladed sword. "The Alphas have spoken, Your Highness," Alaric said, looking from Genevieve to Elias. "They demand the rightful king take his place. But Elias Maximilian is physically broken. He cannot lead a hunt or a battlefield." "I do not need to lead the hunt," Elias projected, his physical body pressing heavily against Genevieve's leg for support. "I have my mate." The word mate sent a shockwave through Genevieve. The ancient bond, dormant while Elias was broken, was awakening. He had waited for her, chosen her as his partner. Elias didn't take the throne. Instead, with a royal grant written on the spot by Commander Alaric, he secured the future of the Silver Pine Pack, restoring their lands and canceling their debts. Garrett Hayes was exiled, his wealth confiscated and redistributed to the packs he had exploited. Maximilian was stripped of his title and imprisoned, facing a tribunal for his centuries-old treason. The decennial Tournament of Fangs didn't have a winner. It had a revelation. That day, the mocked pet was revealed as the true Alpha King, Elias Maximilian, whose return shattered a 20-year conspiracy. Yet, he chose not to rule alone. He elevated Genevieve Sterling, the outcast who had saved him, as his equal and rightful queen. Together, they rebuilt Silver Pine from the ashes, establishing a new kingdom defined not by wealth or cruelty, but by resilience, honor, and the powerful, unbreakable bond that saved them both.